Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here, doing another episode of How Come No One Plays This Shit. The card that I'm talking about today is Thestalos the Firestorm Monarch. A card that has almost become a forgotten monarch, much like Grand Lord, but I feel like Thestalos is still really good this format, and oddly enough, I feel like he's losing some of his shine to like mediocre cards. Actually, now obviously take into consideration the context in which I'm speaking, and you know, I'm just being practical here. I'm obviously talking about running Thestalos in Frog Monarchs or Lancer Frog based decks, you know, decks that generally will abuse the hell out of Treeborn Frog. I'm not talking about, you know, trying to throw in Thestalos into your Fire Kings or Fire Fist or something like that in the side deck or main deck. I'm just talking about the context of one or two specific decks. Alright, so when the guy top forward YCS Austin running Frog Monarchs, I saw that he was playing multiple copies of Raiza, and I started thinking about that and just doing some theorio, and I was like, Raiza is really mediocre this format. He even said in the video that, you know, Raiza isn't very good against Mermills, and I was like, well, I definitely can see that, but why play a card that's not really good against the best deck of the format? Alright, so here's some of the reasons why I think Thestalos is a really strong card. So first off, one of the reasons I really like Thestalos is because he can counter a very common tactic that's been used and employed against Frog Monarch players for ages, and that's simply to not invest any cards on the board until you feel like you can set up an adequate defense. When people see that you dump the Treeborn into the graveyard turn one, whether you swap Frog it or, you know, you Foolish Burial it, it's very common for people not to put any monsters or any spells and traps on their field, and what that does is that locks you out of your Raiza or your Caius plays. You know, obviously you have nothing to target. You don't want to target your own stuff. That would just set you back. So, you know, you can't summon your monsters. You can't get your barrage of Monarch started. Well, Thestalos really doesn't give a fuck if your opponent has cards on the field. That's why I love him. You know, your opponent can keep their nice big hand of 6 cards. Thestalos is going to get his regardless. You know, as soon as you summon him, he's already paid for himself. I mean, it doesn't matter if your opponent effect Veilers it or whatever. As long as he gets his one card, you know, he's already accomplished his job. And unlike the other two Monarchs that are commonly played, he doesn't need to wait around for your opponent to, you know, say, okay, now I'm going to set 5 go. And then, you know, you're just like, oh, geez, now I have to deal with all of this. I like the fact that Thestalos can inflict direct damage. You know, usually it's minimal. You know, you play against Mermill, a lot of times you're hitting a card that's like level 2, level 3. Those are common in the deck. So maybe you're only doing 400, 600 or whatever. But you never know when you might end up hitting that Gores or hitting that Abyss Megalo or something like that and just randomly ending the game. So much like Caius, I just like the fact that, you know, the potential of winning in main phase 2 is always there. Thestalos is also a far better card when you combine it with Soul Exchange than Raiza. I've always felt like if you Soul Exchange and then use Raiza, it's really mediocre. And the reason is, yeah, I mean, you get to, I guess, set your opponent back a card because they have to draw something that was, you know, maybe already on the field, but you can't put pressure on them. If they know that you can't attack, I mean, it's like, what are you really doing? You didn't really do anything. Like, you didn't advance your game state. You know, Thestalos, not only did you remove a monster, but you hit their hand too. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter if you can attack. You remove 2 resources off the field. You know, I feel like, you know, a lot of people will say, well, Raiza gets rid of any XC and it gets rid of face down monsters. But when you look at the context of Frog Monarchs, it's like you already play triple Caius, you already play triple enemy controller, and most versions are running, you know, 2 to 3 copies of Soul Exchange. So it's like, you know, Synchros and XCs, they're not really problems for this deck at all. You know, I feel like Thestalos does something that the rest of the deck can't do. It attacks the hand. You know, getting resources out of your opponent's hand for Frog Monarchs it's damn near impossible. And Thestalos is one of those cards where it really just opens up, you know, another dimension to the deck. You know, like when you summon Light and Darkness Dragon, that can eat up a bunch of your opponent's resources. So chances are, mid to late game, they're only sitting on maybe 2 to 3 cards. You drop a Thestalos next turn, it's like you really don't have any resources. I feel like Thesty is way better against Fire Fist and Mermill than Raiza will ever be. You know, you look at Raiza against Fire Fist, like let's take a couple of examples. Let's say your opponent has a field of Bear and Tenki, right? Raiza is pretty much useless unless you're going for game, because if you spin the Bear, okay, you can attack for 24, and that's great and everything, but next turn, your opponent just summons the bear, launches the Tinky, attacks, and then gets another Tinky. And if you spin the Tinky, I mean, you can run over the bear, but they can just play the Tinky next turn, search another bear, you know, launch the Tinky, and then attack and get another Tinky. So it's like you're kind of fucked. If you have Thestalos in that situation, yes, your opponent gets the they get to keep the Tinky. However, not only do they lose the bear on the field, you know, you hit a card in their hand, which hopefully will be another Fire Fist monster. And I mean, you're putting a position to where it's not guaranteed that you're going to lose your Monarch the next turn. I mean, you're putting the position to where they have to, you know, have another bear in addition to the fact that you still are taking a card out their hand. So chances are that could be the bear. You know, you look at Mermail in that matchup, Raiza is just god-awful. Like, the only card that Raiza's really, or the only situation Raiza's really good against is if your opponent sets a monster. And I mean, 90% of the time your opponent sets a monster, it's Mermaid Bitch. So yeah, she's pretty good there. But let's say that, you know, these common situations to where your opponent summons a first turn Spike and has a face down spell or trap, or they summon, you know, an Undyne. You don't want to spin Undyne and Spike. I mean, those are horrible cards to spin. You don't want your opponent reusing those, and you can't target the back row either, because if it's the Abyss Spear, then you're just ultra fucked. I mean, you're just going to get wrecked. Thestalos will not only kill that monster, but it's just like the bear situation. It takes a card out of their hand. So that card that they just searched, I mean, maybe you get lucky and hit that, but Mermail was a deck to where, you know, it's not the best top decking deck out there. So, you know, while Thesty might end up losing out to the Abyss Spear play, it's like the end result is far better because you still took out 2 of their resources. So, I mean, I understand that Raiza is a cool card. I just feel like in this format, you look at a lot of the matchups like wind-ups and just about every deck in the format, and Raiza is so mediocre. I feel like the format is so fast right now. I feel like if your opponent just has one back row, you know, you can't ever really summon Raiza into it, because if it's like a bottomless or a torrential, then you just didn't do anything. But with Thestalos, you know, if it's a bottomless or a torrential, he still gets his effect, you know. So I've always felt like Thestalos right now is the second best Monarch in the game. I just feel like he doesn't get any shine, you know what I mean? And as far as getting rid of Xyz and Synchros, I mean, you've got other cards to do that. So let me know what you guys think. I still think Thestalos is a really good card. If there's any other cards that you guys maybe want me to talk about, leave that in the comment section below. Take care and have a nice day. Subscribing makes life happy.